Hi students, this week I have a special treat. Instead of giving you a lecture, I get to introduce you to someone who is very cool, Dr. Fulden Ibrahimhakkioglu, who will talk to us about her work on Friedrich Nietzsche, Sara Ahmed, and her music career in the queer feminist punk scene in Turkey. So Fulden is a philosophy professor and a scholar, and she is in two feminist queer punk bands, Emasculator, am I saying that right?
Yeah.
Awesome. And Secondhand Underpants. So I've put some of her philosophical writings and some of her music on Blackboard for you to enjoy. We are discussing the reevaluation of values in existentialism this week. And I wanted to start with a quote from one of Fulden's articles, which is called Creating a Magic World. She says, through music, protest, art, and zines, feminist punks do not only seek to negate the prevalent misogyny sedimented in hardcore punk culture and beyond, but they also seek to create new spaces where new values would take root. Acts of resistance undertaken collectively translate into acts of world building and transformation. So thank you so much for agreeing to share your work and music with us today.
Thanks for inviting me.
Oh, wonderful. I thought I'd start by having you describe your work to my students, kind of explaining the philosophical ideas that you find interesting and what your sort of philosophy is like.
My philosophical work mostly focuses on questions around the body and affect, and the way in which these bear on political subjectivity and possibilities for resistance. So race and gender in that regard are very much central to my analyses. And I try to approach philosophical questions in concrete ways by engaging with and drawing from a lot of contemporary issues. And the articles that I shared with you, I think pretty much reflect that. Thinking about music, thinking about punk rock is actually a semi-new area for me. And I don't really have any sort of formal training in music or in music studies for that matter. So it's really me trying to think about the music that I enjoy and the music that I create in a more philosophical way and think about the political effects of that.
That's really exciting. So you started out by working on feminist philosophy and affect theory. And for my students, affect is sort of philosophy of emotion. It's kind of beyond that. It has to do with the politics of feelings, and it's not just sort of what we think of feelings, but also embodiment. And so you write about things like feminist fury in Pussy Riot and how feelings are a part of feminist punk rock. So did you explore that in your philosophy and then you sort of moved to the punk rock? Were you doing punk rock previously and suddenly you started philosophizing about it? So how did these two ideas come together for you?
I think it more or less started simultaneously. I mean, those were just two very different aspects of my life at the time, where I was seeing myself to be simply expressing my feelings and exploring my frustrations and so on. But then I was getting more and more into philosophy because I was always a very curious person and I would never be satisfied with the explanations that adults would give me about anything. So I was sort of a willful subject in the way Sara Ahmed talks about it in the chapter that you assigned. So those two things, I think they started out simultaneously for me, but then I started to see a real connection between them because I began to become more reflective about my own fury, about my own anger. And so it's like a phenomenology of sorts, right? It's really a reflection on the lived experience, that article in particular, because I started asking myself, okay, well, I am expressing this negative feeling through music, but what is this feeling attached to? Well, it's attached to these injustices that I was observing and that I was reacting to, but it didn't stop with that reaction, because I wanted to turn that into a positive project of collective world building. So that anger, that rage, to me was really attached to acts of love, acts of community building. And that's what I wanted to emphasize, both in my music, but also in my academic work also.
I think that's beautiful. One of the things I really enjoyed about your writing was pointing out the fact that sometimes people assume that you can't be an activist or a feminist and be a loving person because they associate anger and hatred together. But anger can come from this place of love. It can come from a position where you are furious at injustice and you want to create a better world for the people you love and the communities you love. And so it's really interesting. I love Ahmed's work because she's pointing out these sort of insults that, you know, always get thrown at feminists, like, oh, you're angry, you're a killjoy, you make people unhappy. She's saying these are good. If people's happiness is based on like oppressing others, if people's happiness is based on ignoring injustice or just participating in some world that we're so distracted by consumerism, or we're so sort of bought into the system that we're not questioning it, then that happiness should be taken apart. It should be questioned. And I think like this is something that feminists have done a great job articulating, like Sara Ahmed. So tell me a little bit more about how you got into feminist theory, if there's particular figures in feminist theory who are important to you or have really motivated your work.
Sure, but if I could just say something about the comment that you just made, I think it's a very important comment, because most of the time, feminists are also told that, you know, we can't take a joke, that we are way too serious, we take everything too seriously. And to me, this is very interesting because the kind of humor that they're talking about is very much conformist humor, right? And the bands that I play with, we are incredibly playful, we are incredibly humorous. I mean, we just joke around all the time. Our shows are often hilarious. And some people do not understand that. They're like, wait, what is happening here? Isn't feminism supposed to be super serious? But to me, it was always the combination of both, right? It was always that anger that I felt, but also that disruptive humor, that playfulness that I could utilize in a very kind of a resisting way. So when people say those things, when people say that we can't take a joke, I mean, yeah, we can, but that's not what you're saying is just not funny, right? There are various ways to be funny. There are disruptive ways to be funny, and why not go with that? But going back to your original question, I'm sorry, I guess there's like an ambulance or something, I don't
Oh,
know.
I know. My dog keeps barking. I don't know. It's, yeah, quarantine times. Yeah.
Yeah. Uh, but I was first introduced to feminist philosophy in my Introduction to Philosophy course,
Mhm.
which I thought was a very important moment because it was one of the very first philosophy courses that I had ever taken. And we were assigned Introduction to the Second Sex by Simone de Beauvoir,
Mhm.
and this section from Gender Trouble by Judith Butler. So my first exposure to feminist philosophy was through this idea that gender is not really a being, but a doing, a becoming, and that really stuck with me. That really, I think, resonated with me, because it was something that I took for granted up until that point, and it gave me a new way to think about gender. It gave me a new way to conceptualize something that seemed all too familiar to me. It rendered that strange, and I think that's what philosophy does the best. It takes something that's super familiar to you, and it takes it apart, and it renders that thing strange for you. So then you begin to see it in a different light. And as I delved more into feminist philosophy, I was introduced to Audre Lorde and Gloria Anzaldúa and Maria Lugones and Sara Ahmed, Angela Davis. So these women of color, their ideas, they resonated with me on an even deeper level. Being a third world feminist myself, I started to see the connections between gender and race and class and nationality. So where I ended up was actually somewhere very intersectional in that regard. But those are my favorite figures, I think, within feminist philosophy.
That's fantastic. And you do also work on Nietzsche. So and Nietzsche's kind of famously misogynistic. And like, it's interesting because he's a figure who has been taken up by very conservative groups, historically he's been taken up by Nazis, and then there's also people who do feminist readings of Nietzsche as well. So he kind of feeds a lot of different types of projects. Sorry about the dog. So how does Nietzsche kind of enter into your work? What do you find interesting about Nietzsche, and how are you thinking with him?
So when I initially read Nietzsche in high school for the first time, I detested him exactly for the reasons that you just counted, right? He's oftentimes making these casually misogynist comments. He's very much loved by these, I don't know, these some conservative people who buy into this idea of the Übermensch as some sort of like a racial superiority, or these super individualist men who think, you know, they are the best, and that they understand everything because they read Nietzsche. Because of all these reasons, he just seemed just very icky to me the first time when I read him. But as I kept with it, I realized that the gist of his philosophy is life affirmation. And life affirmation isn't something that's specific to an individual or a race or even humans, right? Because it's about life. So it's really about decentralizing the human and thinking about something bigger, thinking about nature, for instance. But why did this idea of life affirmation speak to me? Because I was a very angry teenager, and I needed something more. So I couldn't just take a counter stance and be counterproductive, right? I needed something. I needed to take a step beyond that, and that's where Nietzsche really came in for me, because he talked about the revaluation of all values. He talked about a positive project. So after you get rid of all these prejudices, you get rid of all these life-negating values, you need to come up with something positive that that serves you, that helps you affirm life, that helps you love your own fate, as it were. So that's where his idea of life affirmation came in for me, and I think that's a very important idea. And I don't think you're reading Thus Spoke Zarathustra for this course.
No, Fun.
But there are three figures in that book, and I really enjoy thinking about that transitioning. So first we have the camel, who's weighted down by the entire burden of the world, which we too often feel, right? And then there's the lion, who completely destroys everything because they don't want to be weighed down by this burden. They just want to destruct, right? Which is also a sentiment that resonate with me sometimes.
Yeah.
But then the third figure is the child. So after all of that, you need the playful child to create the world anew, and that sort of a creative impulse, I think, is very strong with Nietzsche, and it always comes in whenever I think about activism, whenever I think about music, whenever I think about philosophy, because philosophy is really the creation of concepts, as Deleuze and Guattari put it. Music is really, you're creating new moods, you're creating new ways of exploring life, right? And with activism, you're trying to build a new world. And even though Nietzsche wasn't too much of a collectivist kind of thinker, I think there are ways in which we can think about this collectively without falling into herd mentality, which he warns us a lot about. So this, I don't think this doesn't have to be necessarily an individualistic kind of a project, but it can also be a collective kind of a project as well.
Yeah, I think that's a really powerful distinction to make, is that, Nietzsche is critiquing herd mentality, but that doesn't mean you have to get rid of like collaboration and healthy groups. Like a herd is a mindless group where people just follow along. And that itself can be kind of dangerous because members who don't fit in, right, get ostracized. And so that, even if it's emphasizing a we over an I, it's not necessarily a healthy support of all the individuals within that herd. And then if we are thinking about sort of more authentic bonds of friendship and sort of camaraderie that can celebrate individualities, that like an individual requires support from other people, like, so we require healthy interdependence, and so that's different than a herd mentality. And building those sort of communities actually requires a lot of, as you said, playfulness, resistance, uh, a lot of understanding of who we are and what we want the world to look like. I love that you've been describing your music and your activism as playful. Can you explain and describe kind of what the music scene is like where you are, and talk about your bands a little bit for my students?
Sure. So the music scene in which I'm located is either too serious, right? They see themselves as the political punks who do very important kind of work, and some of them do, right? Or it's just completely, silly music that people just do for fun. And I think we're situated somewhere in between, because I don't think those two things are mutually exclusive in any way. But the scene is heavily male dominated, and it's heavily cishet male dominated in particular. So we are oftentimes marginalized, but when we're not, they just see us as a token. So for instance, they would have this all male lineup, but then they would want to add us onto the bill because they wouldn't want to be seen, to as this, all male festival. So they can just suggest, oh, but hey, we have this band here. So we try to sort of change that by organizing different kinds of events and festivals and workshops and so on and so forth. But there are just not enough women and non-binary individuals within the scene, and there's a good reason for that. It's, it's just hostile towards us. So we're trying to change that.
That's wonderful. Are there any, so you have some projects in the works right now, like you're recording a new album, right?
We recorded a couple of singles, but then something happened with the computer and they got erased, so we had to do it all over again, and
oh no,
that's why it took us so long to do that.
have you been able to find like a great sense of community in the feminist and queer scene through your music? Like, has it been an opportunity to meet new interesting people? Like, what sort of communities do you see coming out of this?
It sure has been like that, especially ever since we started organizing a Lady Fest in Istanbul. So Lady Fest is this like this international event, but it's always organized locally. So by a group of, people from that local scene, they just decide to use the name and they organize it. And that's what we ended up doing. So we've been doing that every year, except this year for obvious reasons. But that has been such a great space to attract a lot of people, a lot of like-minded people, and I did get to meet various activists and artists and musicians through that. And it has been really building up to a really nice community, I think. Mm-hmm.
That's fantastic. Does your philosophy influence your lyric writing? Like, are there moments, I don't know, when you're actually like maybe quoting Emma Goldman or Audre Lorde in your music? Like, what is your creative process like, and is it directly influenced by the philosophers you read?
I mean, I'm sure that it is influenced by the philosophers I read on some level. Uh, um, so yeah, I am very much influenced by what I read, but also the conversations that I have and the films that I see and what I experience, and I think, they all come into play. Obviously, I don't think I've ever quoted anyone specifically in any of my lyrics, but the way in which I started making music was it was kind of like a form of escape. So in college, for instance, I would go into this awfully boring epistemology class, and I would, instead of dozing off, I would just start writing lyrics that would be, laden with all this terminology, but in this very sort of this playful and silly way, like making fun of it in a way. So it was a form of escape for me, but then I realized it's not just an escape, because there's also this very important connection, because so academia in Turkey is very formalist, in my opinion. So music has really helped me set myself free from that and just chill out and do something else. But then I realized that my academic work is becoming less and less formalist and more playful and rebellious. So it helped me explore that. But also my academic work, or my engagement with philosophy, has also helped me see music in a different light. So not in terms of this either or that I mentioned, so either super seriously political or just silly games, right? So it's not a matter of either or. So it helped me think about it in this very nuanced, intricate way, and reflect on some of the themes that I explore. And I try to write my lyrics in a very sort of straightforward way, without any kind of heavy-handed or obscure kind of language. But it also, I mean, there's a thought to that too. So it's not just words that aren't attached to anything, right? So it helps me, writing music, I think, helped me to learn how to be more accessible when you're exploring some difficult thoughts. And this is something that I'm also trying to do in my academic writing, which isn't always easy to do, because you're just so used to writing in this very difficult, inaccessible way. So I think they feed one another on some level. But initially, I just thought, this would be just a form of escape. But I was wrong. Philosophy caught me. It wouldn't let me go.
I mean, that's wonderful. And I think it comes back to what you're describing is like this idea of what does it mean to be life affirming? And if philosophy is supposed to help us live better or be more affirming of life, then that sort of very formalistic, abstract, technical way of writing philosophy often feels like we don't get to reincorporate it back into our life because we've kind of have more of an artificial structure we're building. And what you're describing sounds like your music is this sort of philosophical practice. It's this because it's exploring this expression of those ideas and the sort of meaning they have. And music and dance are so important for Nietzsche and his philosophy. I teach aesthetic theory, and so we do some of his music theory. And I mean, there is something so powerful about the way that music expresses ideas that we don't get when we're just reading a book or something like that.
Exactly.
So amazing.
Because it's laden with affect at the same time, right? So it's not just, I mean, writing can do that too, obviously. Nietzsche himself does that. His writing is very much laden with affect. But with music, it physically moves you. So it operates on a different level, I think.
Yeah. Do you feel that when you're performing, like when you're on stage?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
yeah. Mhm.
Oh yeah, I love performing because to me music is never just something that you listen to in the background, but it's very much an embodied practice. So it's very much about being present there and doing something with your body, and so I see it as sort of like a performance art,
Mhm.
and so to me, playing in a band is like a performance art, and music is only a part of that.
That's fantastic. Um, do you have any like moments either in performances or recordings that you want to share with the class? Like this felt like a high point in your experience of music or your musical career, like any moments that kind of stick out to you?
One moment that sticks out to me is during the first Lady Fest Istanbul, I got off stage and these two very young women came up to me and they said, "Finally, this is what we've been waiting for. Thank you so much for organizing this." And I mean, they wanted to take a photograph with me, and
Oh.
it it felt so nice. But then I thought about when I was really young and I didn't really have, I didn't have these spaces. I didn't. There were these shows. There were some girl bands, but it wasn't politicized at all. For the most part, it was just seen as, hey, look, we look cute, and
Yeah.
it was very much co-opted by capitalism. So to have a space where you're explicitly anti-capitalist and you're explicitly feminist, and I think it's important, and um, I mean, it empowers you. Having those women say that to me felt really nice, but it also felt like, hey, I put all this effort into this, I put all this time into this, but it wasn't for just partying or something like that, right? But it was for an important purpose, and that felt validating to me.
That's amazing. Yeah, I think I listened to punk when I was a teenager, and I loved, I was listening to very mainstream stuff. I wasn't cool enough to be into like Bikini Kill when I was young. I was listening to Garbage and Courtney Love and Hole and music like that. But that felt very empowering for me. I identify very much with what Sara Ahmed talks about in Living a Feminist Life and her writings on willful subjects. I was very willful. I wanted to explore the world. I wanted to be a writer and have my voice be heard. And I was in these environments where women were supposed to be very submissive, and like we were supposed to be listeners, not speakers. So men are supposed to speak and we're supposed to listen to them. And like having this fear of women traveling out in the world, like we're too fragile to like be out there in the world. So there was like a lot of messages I kind of got, and I was a rebellious teenager. Not like that rebellious, like I wasn't, partying hard or anything as a teenager, but I was really resisting a lot of the ideas of what it meant to be a woman or what it meant to become a woman. And it was really that music, I think, that fed me and made me feel empowered and made me realize that a lot of those emotions were not something that I was supposed to stuff down or get rid of. I wasn't supposed to lose my willfulness. I was supposed to kind of cultivate it for something, that I could do something with that anger. I could do something with that sort of desire to be a force in the world.
Exactly. I mean, it helps you imagine a different kind of a world, and it helps you imagine yourself as someone, someone who is either different or someone who lives in a different kind of world. So it has that very imaginative kind of effect, I think. That's very important.
That's great. So the last thing I wanted to ask you is, right, as someone who has an academic career, as someone who has a music career, is there any advice you would like to give to my students in my class who are studying existentialism right now?
Well, I would recommend that they, I think they should be very courageous, right? No matter what it is that they want to do, they should have the courage to do it, which is something that I realized very later on in my life, because I was always, I was willful like you were, but I was also very shy. And I felt very insecure. And there are, of course, important reasons for marginalized peoples to be shy and feel insecure, right? That have to do with the structures at play. Uh, but I mean, that's one advice I can give. Just find your courage, just find that and hold on to that, because that's going to be very valuable for you, and then you can learn through that courage, you can learn to be resilient. Yeah, and I guess that's true for anything that you do, not just music or philosophy, but yeah, anything really.
That's beautiful. Thank you so much. And thank you very much for sharing your work and your music with my class.
Thanks for having me. This has been really fun, and it's wonderful to see you again.
It's good to see you too. Okay. Goodbye.
Bye.
Okay.